A lot of people really enjoy food and also a really good recipe. Well, in this nugget, this video, you and I are going to take a look at some of the ingredients that go into the recipe for AAA in a Cisco network. Let's begin. And let's use this as the backdrop for our discussion about AAA. And one of the first ingredients I'd like to chat about is a centralized server. And on this centralized server, in fact, let's go ahead and use this bad boy right there. On this centralized server, we can keep our usernames and passwords. We can also configure on that internal server, we can configure information about what the users are authorized to do. And we can also use that server for accounting records as well. And the benefit of that is that we have central management for our user accounts, including administrators and end users, including the permissions of what they're allowed to do regarding access through or to network devices. So the key is, if we had a server like this, what would we call it? And the reason I chuckle is because it has several names. We could refer to this as an authentication server, because it is. If we're using it for authorizing individual tasks, we could refer to it as an authorization server. And if we're sending accounting records to that server, it could be an accounting server. So if somebody referred to the server as any one of those terms, or if they referred to it as the AAA server, that would also be accurate. So a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So the key here is that this server that has information about usernames and their passwords and what they're authorized to do on the network and has accounting records could be referred to by any of these names. But that's our first building block of an enterprise-wide AAA solution, is having that centralized server. So that's our first building block. Now, by itself, a server that has all that information, this AAA server, is pretty lonely unless somebody's asking questions of it. So what we would also do is we would configure our network devices, our switches and routers and so forth, that any time that they needed to check, if somebody's connecting to those devices, and those devices needed to know, is this person authorized or not, we need to have those network devices check with the AAA server. And you just ask the question, hey, so-and-so is trying to log in. Do they have the right credentials? Yes, let them in. Great, I'll do it. So those devices, the routers and switches who are asking the AAA server for the permission whether or not to let the user in, we can refer to those routers and switches that are using the AAA server for checking authentication. We can refer to those devices as AAA clients. And that's the second piece of our puzzle. We need some AAA clients. And I'll put this in red. So we could configure switch 1 to be a AAA client, so that when somebody tries to connect to it via SSH or Telnet or some other method, we could have the switch go out and ask the server, hey, Bob's trying to log in. Are his credentials correct? And the AAA server could then respond back to the switch and say, yep, Bob's credentials are correct and he's allowed to do XYZ. And we could use that same technique for switch 2 and also for this router and this firewall and this switch and this router and so forth. So our network devices, switches and routers and other devices would be configured as AAA clients talking to and interacting with the AAA server. So initially, a lot of times people, when they think about client, the word client, they think about like an end user device or software on an end station that's acting as a client. But in the context of AAA, our network devices, the routers, the switches, those are acting as AAA clients when they communicate and interact with the AAA server. And when these AAA clients, like switches and routers, when they communicate with the AAA server, we need to have some type of a set of rules or protocols that they can use to communicate with each other. And the protocols, or the language of love, as I like to call it, when AAA clients talk to AAA servers, there's two major protocols. One is called TACACS+, which is spelled like this, TACACS plus. So although the name is TACACS plus, it's just pronounced TACACS. If you don't leave on the plus there, or don't speak it every time, nobody's going to look at you sideways. And the acronym stands for Terminal Access Controller Access Control System. Thank goodness we just call it TACACS. 2 syllables and we're done. And that is one of the languages of love that can be used between a AAA client and a AAA server. The other popular protocol is RADIUS, RADIUS, which is another acronym, which stands for Remote Authentication Dial-In User Service. But nobody, when they're talking about it, refers to it by its full name. They just refer to it as RADIUS. Either one of these two AAA protocols could be used as the set of rules or the language of love between AAA clients and AAA servers. So a great question that might come up is, okay, if we want to do AAA and we want to have our AAA clients like a router or a switch talk to a AAA server, what protocol should we use? Should we use TACACS Plus or should we use RADIUS? And the answer kind of depends on your environment. Now, Radius is an open standard. So if you have lots of different flavors of vendors and devices, Radius, because it's an open standard, works between all those different devices. On the other hand, Cisco's TACAX Plus initially started off as a proprietary protocol, and generally speaking, it works best when you have only Cisco devices that you're working with and managing with TACAX Plus. So in an environment where it's mostly Cisco and most of the TACAX or most of the AAA is used for authenticating, authorizing, and doing accounting for administrators, as they work with the networks, it's very likely you use TACAX in that situation. And for everything else, we're likely going to be using Radius as that protocol between the AAA client and the AAA server. So in this video, you and I have had a chance to take a look at some of the building blocks of AAA, authentication, authorization, and accounting in an enterprise environment. It involves three basic things. Number one, look at my fingers. Number one, it involves some type of a server, a centralized server where we can keep the usernames and passwords and information on what those users are authorized to do, and also send accounting records to that device. That's the server portion. The clients would be our network infrastructure devices, our switches and routers and other devices that communicate and talk to the AAA servers, asking about, hey, Bob's connecting, is he allowed, and so forth. And then third, we took a look at two options for protocols between clients and servers, one being TACAX Plus and the other being Radius. So those are the building blocks for AAA in an enterprise network, and we'll continue this discussion in the very next video. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.